The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the BBC broadcasting house, casting long shadows across the bustling newsroom floor. Production assistants scurried between workstations, their voices a low hum of controlled urgency. Today was different. Everyone could feel it in the air. The Princess of Wales was coming. Kate Middleton's black Range Rover pulled up to the discreet side entrance at precisely 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, just as she preferred. Through the tinted windows, she could see the small crowd of photographers already gathered, their long lenses glinting in the autumn sun. She took a breath, smoothed her navy blazer, and stepped out with the practiced grace that had become second nature over the past decade. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Your Royal Highness, welcome to Broadcasting House. Marian Baxter, the BBC's executive producer, appeared at her elbow almost instantly. Marian was a woman who understood power, how to navigate it, how to leverage it, and most importantly, how to capture it on camera. Her smile was warm but calculating, the kind that had secured her position overseeing the network's most profile interviews. "Thank you for having me," Kate replied, her voice carrying that familiar blend of warmth and formality that had endeared her to millions. But those who knew her well might have noticed something else, a tightness around her eyes, a fractional hesitation before she smiled. Dr. Anya Patel noticed. As Kate's mental health advisor and the architect of many of her public health initiatives, Anya had learned to read the subtle shifts in her client's demeanor. Walking a step behind as they were escorted through the labyrinthine corridors of the BBC, she caught the way Kate's fingers briefly pressed against the small locket at her throat, a nervous habit that had emerged only recently. "The makeup team is standing by," Marian Baxter was saying, her heels clicking efficiently against the polished floor. "We've allocated 45 minutes for prep, then we'll have you in the studio by 11:30 for sound checks. Julian is already reviewing his notes. He's quite excited about today's discussion." "Wonderful. I'm looking forward to discussing the Heads Together expansion." They passed through the main newsroom, where dozens of journalists hunched over their computers, phones pressed to their ears, chasing stories that would shape the day's narrative. A few looked up as the small entourage passed, but most were too absorbed in their work to notice royalty walking among them. The green room was a study in understated luxury, cream leather chairs, fresh flowers, and a spread of refreshments that Kate would politely decline. As Marian excused herself to coordinate final preparations, Anya closed the door and turned to her client. "How are you feeling about today?" she asked gently, settling into the chair across from Kate. "Fine," Kate replied automatically, then caught herself. After months of working together, Anya knew she could see through such responses. "Prepared. The talking points are solid, and I think we can make a real impact with the messaging about early intervention." Anya nodded but didn't look convinced. "Kate, I know this is a sensitive time. If you need to adjust anything about today's approach—" "I'm fine, Anya." Kate's voice carried a finality that didn't invite further questioning. She looked out the small window overlooking Portland Place, watching the London traffic flow in its endless stream. Millie would have wanted the story told. That's what matters. The name hung in the air between them. Millie Jameson, 12 years old, wise beyond her years, and gone too soon. The girl who had become the face of Kate's latest campaign, whose letters still sat in Kate's private office, whose funeral Kate had attended in secret just 3 weeks ago. The loss that Kate hadn't spoken about publicly, that weighed on her every morning when she woke up. Anya reached across and squeezed Kate's hand briefly. "She would have been proud of you." 3 floors up, Julian Rains sat in his office reviewing his research one final time. At 52, he had built his reputation on asking the questions others wouldn't, the uncomfortable truths that needed voicing. His walls were lined with awards and photographs from 30 years in journalism, but lately, he found himself looking most often at a small framed picture tucked behind his computer monitor. His brother David, who had died by suicide 18 months ago, leaving behind questions Julian was still trying to answer. Today's interview notes were spread across his desk like battle plans. He had done his homework, as always. Kate Middleton's mental health initiatives, the funding allocations, the celebrity endorsements, the carefully choreographed public appearances. It was impressive work, certainly, but Julian had learned to look beyond the polished surface. His research assistant had flagged something interesting. A young girl named Millie Jamieson, who had been prominently featured in Kate's campaign materials throughout the summer, then suddenly disappeared from all promotional content in September. No explanation, no follow-up, just silence. Julian's phone buzzed with a text from Marion. "Remember, we need compelling television. The ratings for the breakfast slot have been soft." He understood the subtext. Push harder. Ask the questions that would generate headlines, clips that would trend on social media, content that would keep viewers from switching channels. It was the eternal tension of modern journalism, the balance between public service and public entertainment. Julian picked up the small photo of his brother and studied David's face. "What would you want me to ask?" he murmured to the empty office. Back in the green room, Kate submitted to the ministrations of the makeup artist while Anya reviewed the agreed-upon topics one more time. Mental health awareness, the importance of early intervention, and the expansion of Heads Together into schools across the UK. Safe territory, meaningful work, positive messaging. "The car is ready for departure immediately following," Anya noted, checking her phone. "You have the children's hospital visit at 3, then the evening reception can be pushed if needed." Kate nodded as she watched herself transform in the mirror. The makeup artist worked with practiced efficiency, covering the faint shadows under her eyes, adding color to cheeks that had grown pale with grief. It was a kind of armor, this careful construction of public Kate, poised, radiant, unshakable. "5 minutes, Your Royal Highness," a production assistant announced from the doorway. As they walked toward the studio, Kate felt her pulse quicken. This was routine by now. She had given hundreds of interviews, spoken to audiences of thousands, navigated the most challenging questions with diplomacy and grace. But something felt different today. The weight of Millie's letter in her handbag, the words the girl had written just days before her death. "Don't be afraid to cry, Kate. Cry in front of them. It's the only way they'll understand." The studio was a marvel of controlled chaos. Cameras positioned at precise angles, lighting rigs casting everything in a warm, flattering glow, sound technicians making final adjustments to microphone levels. Julian Rains was standing beside the interview chairs, reviewing his notes one last time. When he looked up and saw Kate approaching, he offered a professional smile. "Your Royal Highness, thank you for joining us today." "Thank you for having me," Kate replied, settling into her chair with practiced ease. The sound technician clipped a microphone to her blazer lapel, testing levels while the director called out final adjustments. "We're live in 90 seconds, Marion announced from the control room, her voice crackling through the studio speakers. Kate looked out at the small audience of BBC staff gathered to watch the interview live. She spotted Anya standing near the back, offering an encouraging nod. In her mind, she could hear Millie's voice. "You're going to help so many people, Kate. You're going to make them feel less alone." 60 seconds to air. Julian Rains straightened his tie and glanced once more at his notes. The standard questions were there, but underneath, scrawled in his own handwriting, was the line that had been nagging him all morning. Symbolic monarchy or genuine advocacy? 30 seconds. Kate closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. She thought of all the young people who would be watching, all the families struggling with mental health challenges, all the conversations this interview might spark. This was why she did this work, not for the cameras or the headlines, but for the possibility of making a difference. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The red light blinked on and Julian Rains turned to face the camera with his practiced anchor smile. "Good morning. I'm Julian Rains, and today we're joined by Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales to discuss her groundbreaking work in mental health awareness and the exciting expansion of the Heads Together campaign." The studio lights bathed everything in a warm, professional glow, as Julian Rains delivered his opening with the smooth confidence of 30 years in television. Kate sat across from him, her posture perfect, hands folded gently in her lap, the picture of royal composure. "Your Royal Highness, the Heads Together campaign has reached millions of people across the UK over the past 7 years. As you expand into schools, what do you see as the most critical need facing young people today?" Kate's response was measured, thoughtful, exactly what her media training had prepared her to deliver. "Thank you, Julian. What we're seeing consistently is that young people want to talk about mental health, but they need safe spaces and trusted adults who can guide those conversations. The school environment provides both. From the control room, Marion Baxter leaned forward, studying the monitors. Good television required more than polished answers. It needed moments that felt real, unguarded, human. Kate was giving them textbook answers, perfect for the palace press office, but not necessarily compelling for viewers scrolling through their phones. "Push a little," Marion murmured into her headset to the floor director. "We need energy." Julian nodded almost imperceptibly, his years of experience allowing him to adjust mid-interview. "That's fascinating. You mentioned trusted adults, and I think many of our viewers would be curious about your own journey with mental health. How much of this work comes from personal experience?" For just a moment, Kate's carefully constructed mask flickered. It was barely perceptible, a slight tightening around her. The question hit Kate like a physical blow. She felt the color drain from her face, felt her carefully maintained composure crack down the middle. Millie's name, spoken so casually on live television, brought an immediate rush of grief that she was utterly unprepared for. In the control room, Marion leaned forward, sensing a shift in the energy. The cameras caught everything: Kate's sharp intake of breath, the way her hands briefly trembled before she clasped them together more tightly. Millie is an extraordinary young person, Kate managed, her voice slightly strained. She brought tremendous insight to our work. But Julian, following the thread of what felt like a significant story, pressed on. Is she no longer involved with the campaign? Anya took a step forward from her position at the back of the studio, every instinct telling her to intervene. But this was live television, and any disruption would only make things worse. Kate looked down at her hands, buying herself a moment to breathe. In her mind, she could see Millie's hospital room, could hear the girl's voice reading from her journal about hope and fear and the weight of dying young, could remember holding those small hands as Millie slipped away 3 weeks ago, surrounded by family and fairy lights and all the love in the world. Every young person who contributes to this work touches our lives in meaningful ways, Kate said finally, her voice carefully controlled but lacking its earlier warmth. But Julian, following the thread of what felt like a significant story, pressed on. Is she no longer involved with the campaign? Anya took a step forward from her position at the back of the studio, every instinct telling her to intervene. But this was live television, and any disruption would only make things worse. Kate looked down at her hands, buying herself a moment to breathe. In her mind, she could see Millie's hospital room, could hear the girl's voice reading from her journal about hope and fear and the weight of dying young, could remember holding those small hands as Millie slipped away 3 weeks ago, surrounded by family and fairy lights and all the love in the world. Every young person who contributes to this work touches our lives in meaningful ways, Kate said finally, her voice carefully controlled but lacking its earlier warmth. But Julian, following the thread of what felt like a significant story, sharpened his focus. This was the moment every experienced interviewer recognized, when the polished talking points gave way to something real and unguarded. "Your Royal Highness, forgive me for pressing, but your campaign has always emphasized the importance of talking openly about loss and grief. If something has happened to Millie, wouldn't that be exactly the kind of story that could help others facing similar challenges?" The studio fell silent except for the low hum of equipment. Kate stared at Julian for a long moment, and for the first time in the interview, her royal composure completely cracked. Her eyes filled with tears that she blinked back rapidly, but not before the cameras caught them. She began, then stopped. The weight of 3 weeks of private grief,
of holding Millie's death close to her heart while continuing her public duties, suddenly felt unbearable under the bright studio lights. Julian, recognizing that he had touched something raw and significant, made a decision that would change the trajectory of his career. Instead of backing down, he leaned into the moment. Your Royal Highness, grief is one of the most universal human experiences, yet we so rarely see public figures model how to navigate it authentically. If you've lost someone important to your work, to your heart, wouldn't sharing that experience be the most powerful advocacy of all? The studio fell silent, except for the low hum of equipment. Kate stared at Julian for a long moment, and for the first time in the interview, her royal composure completely cracked. Her eyes filled with tears that she blinked back rapidly, but not before the cameras caught them. She began, then stopped. The weight of 3 weeks of private grief, of holding Millie's death close to her heart while continuing her public duties, suddenly felt unbearable under the bright studio lights. Julian, recognizing that he had touched something raw and significant, made a decision that would change the trajectory of his career. Instead of backing down, he leaned into the moment. Your Royal Highness, grief is one of the most universal human experiences, yet we so rarely see public figures model how to navigate it authentically. If you've lost someone important to your work, to your heart, wouldn't sharing that experience be the most powerful advocacy of all?